the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
There are things that happen in this world that you will never forget. There are things in this world where you just don't understand why they happened. Of course, you know that Australia is trying to deal with what happened in Bondi Junction yesterday. The death of so many people, the madness of the killer, families' lives that have been changed forever by the person that they have lost, or the person who has been injured, or the person who saw the worst thing they will ever see in their life. Now, this is a time where, when those things happen in a setting that all of us know, like the back of our hand, we all know our local shops. We all have taken our babies to our local shops to try to get a little bit of relief in the early months of their life. We've all gone to the local shops to prepare for big occasions like weddings. We've all had experiences of thinking that if something went terribly wrong, we would all step up and be able to stop something in its tracks. But yesterday, for too many people, that became the reality. The madness of a man making his way from shop to shop and floor to floor, taking lives indiscriminately as he did so. More people are in hospital as we speak now, and I'll have an update for you in the next few minutes about the very latest, about what is happening into both the investigation but also into the recovery of people who have not even started the journey of recovery. But there are millions of people who live in Sydney and millions more around the country who all feel deeply about what we've seen in the past couple of days. Our text message chains all went in the same direction when we first heard about this. Our WhatsApp groups all had a series of suspicions until we started to know more about the person who is responsible. Today, at the front of Westfield Bondi Junction, people did all they could for people that they knew, or more likely, people that they had never met, but people who they could easily assume would be just like themselves. Just like the murder of Violaine White in Ipswich a few months ago, it's incredibly familiar that all of us will spend time at the shops for 5 minutes or a few hours on a Saturday afternoon. In her case, her little girl, her little granddaughter, saw her life being taken. In the case of the 6 people who were murdered by this man, there were many more who saw those murders take place. Today, people went into the mall in Bondi Junction and they laid flowers. A simple note to do something in a moment where you wouldn't forget this, but you certainly don't understand it. They were citizens, they were friends, they were locals, they were members of a community. They were joined by the leaders, both local political leaders, state, and of course the Prime Minister as well. Now, I remember bringing you this program from Martin Place in Sydney after the Lindt Cafe siege and the deaths that took place there. And the flowers that were in Martin Place, well, they outnumbered the number of pavers or bricks within just a couple of days. That will be exactly what is going to happen in Bondi over the next few days. What happens over the next few weeks, the next few months, of course, becomes a lot more complicated. Now, I am just as baffled and just as confused about what has happened as everybody else. I would hope that we're not going to start a race amongst people in the media for hot takes about what this truly means or truly doesn't mean or truly represents. It will be a painful period as we have to slowly wait and put together a picture of the person who did this. But as with mass shooting events that take place in the United States, when it comes to this scenario, you won't hear me use the name of the killer. I do want to understand how the killer got to where they got, and I do want to understand what they did. His family, of course, are feeling so deeply because they know something was wrong with him for a long time. What, of course, happened after the tragedy of Port Arthur all those years ago was that Australia's leaders decided that there should be a national response to try to avoid something like that happening again. And that was hard at the time, but it's easier than what we're about to confront in the next little while here in Australia. Because the weapon that was used is, of course, already illegal to be used in public spaces. But whom the attacker may end up being is something that many families around the country are scared of, because there is a member of their family, be it their son, as it was for the parents in Toowoomba, or be it a cousin, brother or sister, a more distant member of the family, but you know something's going wrong. We have to have the same response about Australia's mental health system now that we had about gun ownership in 1996. Now again, I don't know what happened the day before, the month before, the year before to the person who is the killer. But what I do know is that we have made changes in the past to our mental health system that were supposedly for the benefit of the people who had a form of mental illness that could turn violent, could turn destructive. We decided a long time ago to walk away from institutionalisation when terms like mental hospitals were being used. And while everyone with mental illness does not automatically harbour violence inside them, there has to be a better system than the one that we have now, when a family knows that there is something potentially dangerously wrong with a member of their family. We need to make sure that at the New South Wales level, and I would hope the national level as well, that we re-examine this question about whether the best place for people who are right on the edge is to be amongst the rest of the community, or whether we have to change a system where the families are able to make sure that these people end up in the safest place possible. Yes, firstly for themselves, but secondly, and clearly most importantly, for the rest of us. The reality of what has changed in our country in the many years since things like Port Arthur has been an explosion in people with significant mental health issues. Again, I repeat, for anyone half listening, I'm not suggesting that any and everyone with mental illness is a potential killer. But in the same way that we did not assume that everyone who owned a gun was a potential mass shooter, we did everything we could to deal with the risk. Now, I was a young boy when I remember the football game I was listening to at the time was interrupted back in the very early 90s by a man who was running around a shopping centre in Sydney called the Strathfield Plaza. He had a gun, and he killed 8 people with that gun. And while Sydney, thankfully, has never seen the violence of that from 1991 until 2024, this man has been able to take almost as many lives with a knife. Now again, the laws are very clear about knife crime in Australia, about what lives you can and you can't own. But if that needs to be dealt with and have a conversation about, then sure, we've got to go there. We've got to be willing to do the hard work of making tough decisions. We've also got to make sure that in a world where technology means that in the palm of your hand you have a device where you can make a video call to the other side of the world and you can do it for free, that the computer systems of all of our different state police actually talk to each other, so that somebody who has a potentially violent history, a series of incidents, that those incidents are known when that person moves from state to state. Sadly, that's not the case when it comes to people who have histories of domestic violence or people who've had histories of child abuse. There's no suggestion that either of those things are directly linked to the person involved here, but you get my point. We've got to have hard conversations. We've got to have politicians that are willing to have the hard conversations and to put hard dollars behind some of the discussions that need to be had. Tonight, we're going to try and have a conversation about not just understanding, but also working out the where to from here, understanding that for half a dozen families. It never changes. The grief will just morph. For the dozen or so more people that were injured, again, their fear will be with them for a lifetime. We're going to do everything we can to make sure that these things never happen again. But obviously, we remain resolute to continue to make the most of our public spaces, to go wherever we choose to go, to trust that the systems that are around us will do their best to keep us as safe as possible. But as always, after something big and terrible like this, I know that I did exactly what you did. I just kept telling my kids today that I loved them. They kind of got a bit irritated that I was doing it, but that's what you do. Just kept hugging my wife randomly. Because while we're never able to stop whatever random moment of madness that could end up altering every family forever, just make sure you tell everyone you love them every day, all day, every day. Again, tonight on the show, we're going to talk to a lot of different people, from the community leaders, some people with a bit more information about the person responsible for all of this. We'll also have conversations about that mental health system. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad we're going to have that conversation together. I want to start, however, with the people who may have, but probably didn't know, the people who died in Bondi Junction yesterday. The people who were those that were laying the flowers, because that's what I think was a beautiful act that all of us, at some point in time, if we can get anywhere near that place, would certainly be sending our strength and love.
It's just, why? Why did this happen? You know, it's just innocent lives lost.
So this doesn't happen in Australia.
A place that we work in and socialise in and we live in is not right.
Now, at this point in time, we've moved from the full breaking news where there's a new fact every 10 minutes to now a scenario where, as things have calmed down, we start to get more of a picture of the little details, the granular details about what led up to, what happened, and of course the time after. This is the latest from New South Wales Police.
We don't know a motive. What we do understand so far is that there's no ideological motivation. We do understand that there is a history of mental health, but it will be the ongoing work of the investigators to determine what his activities were yesterday and the days before that might indicate a motive.
The 6 lives that, of course, have been lost, they are as varied as a woman who pushed her child out of the way to make sure that she could save her own life, a young woman who was preparing for her own wedding, a security guard who was a refugee in this country working to try to keep people safe, a woman who was a key part of her community and an architect, and yet another mother who will never return to her children. Of the many more that are in hospital, this is the latest that we have about them.
It was an opportunity just for the Premier and I to touch base with staff and just to say thank you. We know that there was multiple patients transferred here last night, and the staff, like they have across all our health facilities, have performed miracles in many ways, and it was just a small opportunity just to say thank you to the men and women who have no doubt saved lives.
So many moments of this have been caught on camera, including a moment before the madness took hold, when the killer was simply walking in and around the shopping centre. He attempted to have a meal. He didn't have enough money to pay for it, so he returned a couple of hours later. He sat down, he ate it for 15 minutes. Quite obviously, in his bag was the weapon that, of course, has changed so many lives. Queensland Police told us that they were aware of him, but he was not a man with any substantial criminal record.
Whilst the investigations are in their infancy and we're still conducting thorough investigations to assist New South Wales, I can say that the man has never been arrested by police in Queensland, nor has he been charged with any criminal offence.
Liam Mendes, one of many great reporters that have been giving us more information about every angle of all of this. He writes for the Australian newspaper. Liam joins us now. Liam, good evening. What is the latest you've been able to work out about this killer, and what more can you tell us about the type of person that he was?
Thanks for having me, Paul. Obviously, it's a tragic day for Australians all around the country, and we have learnt quite a lot more about this man, this person who's gone into Bondi Junction and committed these horrific acts. And what's come out is that, he's had no background, no real criminal background. He's had a few run-ins with police in the past, up in Queensland, most recently in December last year. But that was just a general run-in with police where, they take his details and maybe it was a minor incident, but he wasn't charged with anything. He's never been before the courts. That's kind of the more extraordinary things about this. Some more details have come out regarding his mental health illnesses, such as schizophrenia. That's being looked into by police. And then there's also some online. He's got quite a few profiles for escorting profiles where he was making himself available for these services online up until most recently as last year as well, and that was based in Sydney.
And I also noticed that some of the reporting is that he's popped up in a few different places online. Firstly, this escorting stuff, and again, you were part of that information break today, but also that he had a pretty active social media presence. I understand that there was a Facebook page which now no longer is available to the public, but also there was pop-ups on things like, and quite, frightening, where you see things like he had a review that he had posted about a knife sharpening service. It appears that, again, his social media presence or his online presence has, again, been all over the place.
That's right, and that's one of the things that police are really looking into now. It's this obsession with weapons, and we're talking firearms, pistols and knives. There's been these reviews that have been posted online about him going to a knife sharpening store, not being happy with the performance of how the knife was sharpened, and then he posted in a Facebook group essentially looking for people who were interested to meet up with him and that have access to firearms. And obviously that's something that police are going to be looking at very, very closely in the coming days and weeks and months of this investigation.
Now, understandably, his family, a lot of attention. People know where they live. We've seen some pictures on television. We're choosing not to show them right here, right now. Some neighbours have had plenty to say about comings and goings, but the family did release a statement today. It was pretty absolute that they understood the difficulties of everyone here, but also absolute, trying not to use the word praise, but understanding, I should say, of the police officer who ended up taking his life because he was going to take more life if it didn't happen that way.
That's right. They released a statement through Queensland Police, and it essentially said that they understood and their thoughts were with this police officer, Amy Scott, who has been praised, by everyone up to the Prime Minister for running into the Westfield shopping centre on her own without any other officers as backup. There were other people that joined in after her who have that's been well documented. But yes, that is something that the family have been extremely supportive, and their thoughts and feelings are with all of the victims. They're probably hurting equally as much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Liam, thank you so much. Thank you for your reporting, and thank you for staying up a little bit late to have a chat to us about it tonight. I really do appreciate it. Thank you. One of the people who was there to represent their community at that wreath laying, which it now seems that it will be the general feel of people leaving their floral tributes, is the local mayor, the Waverley Council Mayor, Paula Malassos, and she joins us now. Mayor, thank you very much. The community the night after, just as shocked as it was yesterday, but tell us, what was it like to be in and around that mall today as the spontaneous tributes have started to pop up?
Good evening, Paul. Yeah, look, it's been quite an extraordinary experience. Certainly people have been in shock and they remain in shock. There is a feeling of not actually understanding why this has actually happened, that is this real? And people also needing, I think, to go through some kind of process for themselves to be able to try and make sense of this. And the floral tributes that you can actually see there, they started arriving at about 6:30 this morning. People would come very quietly, put the flowers down, just stay, and then they'd hang around the mall for a little bit. It's like people needed to be together, to be able to grieve together, to support each other, to try and make collective sense of exactly what happened, and to try and come to some understanding, given that it was such a senseless thing. So yes, there was a lot of people who were, a lot of people were teary, but it was also a great sense of quiet that was there, particularly early in the morning. So yes, it was. People are still in a state of shock. I mean, I'm still trying to process it,
of course,
myself.
Yeah, I mean, Paula, give me an idea of some of the conversations that you've had today, and they could be with people who knew many that were involved in all of this. They could be the people that are owning the shops in and around it, or of course they could be your fellow members of the community. Tell me about the types of things you've talked about today with them.
One of the store owners I spoke with said to me that he was just in shock, obviously. I mean, that's going to be a word you're going to hear a lot of, I think. But that he had been there for 40 years. And he and other people, myself included, have been saying things like, but Waverley is a safe place. Bondi Junction is a safe place. You know, parents allow their children to go to Westfields in Bondi Junction because it is safe. And today, or yesterday, this senseless act just completely turned everything on its head. And I think people are still dumbfounded as to what happened, and that it will take a little while for people to, I suppose, feel that they've been able to deal with it. I think the important aspect in all of this, though, was the police were very quick to be able to release information.
Yes.
And so the fact that we were actually able to talk with people this morning about this person being on his own, he was a sole perpetrator, that he was suffering from mental health problems, and that there was no kind of prevailing ideology, those things were really important, because it then settled people that the place was secure and safe again. So that was critical. But there was also a lot of recognition by people there, recognition of the incredible heroic acts of everyday people who were there just either hanging out, meeting friends, doing their shopping, who actually exhibited incredible acts of bravery. A standard, ordinary person running towards the danger so that they could help another person who may have been injured. Young people who were there to serve people in the various retail shops, who were actively herding people into their establishments so they could actually keep people safe. And of course, that incredible, as you've got on your screen now, that incredible image of the woman police officer who was outside the building, but she heard exactly what was happening, went rushing in on her own and confronted this man who clearly was agitated. You could see that in the vision. And she went towards him. Incredible act of bravery. And again, a lot of people were talking to me about that today, extremely appreciative of what she did. But again, trying to also make sense of the tragic loss of lives, especially Ash, who had her young baby there, and the fact that she entrusted her baby to complete strangers, try and save that child. So as you can see and hear, there was a wide range of emotion, people were thinking about it. People were needing to talk it through as a way of trying to help themselves process what was happening.
Paula, thank you so much for giving us that insight, and strength and love to you and to the community that are going to have to, again, once the world stops spinning, and it is starting to slow down now, you start to deal with a whole new range of emotions. So again, nothing but strength and love from all of us to all of you, and thank you for your time tonight. I wanted to have a chat tonight to my colleague and my friend Andrew Bolt, because he's always got such incredible insight and compassion, but also understanding at moments like this. And as we're all just, again, trying to get our head around things, and it's not as frenetic as it was 24 hours ago, and it now starts to feel slightly different now. I wanted the chance to have a chat to him tonight. I'm sorry these are the circumstances under which we chat, my dear friend, but what an incredible thing for all of us to watch and now deal with.
I know, it's the waste, the senselessness of it. I mean, we're all trying to think of a way to rationalise it, to come up with, if only we do this, we can be safe going to a supermarket, or a shopping mall. But seriously, it's one of those, I think this is one of the reasons so many people are thinking, oh, Islamic terrorism, that will explain it. Or then later these crazies on the internet say, oh no, it's a Jewish guy, Benjamin Cohen, what done it? It's just obscene stuff, fighting this proxy war on this tragedy, when in fact now we know it was a schizophrenic man, Joel Cauchi from Queensland. How are you going to defend yourself from that? How would you predict, I should go to, that shop and not this shop, or I should not shop on a Saturday? There's nothing. It was just so random. And you actually saw, how random it was in the choice of victims, apart from one thing, that so many were women. But I mean, you had the daughter of a multimillionaire as one of the victims, John Singleton's daughter. My sympathies go out to the family. But also a Pakistani refugee who was acting as a security guard, also dead. I mean, it's just so random, which in a way makes it so perplexing, doesn't it? But I will say, even though it's too easy, we don't know enough, we simply don't know enough to say, look, one lesson from this is this, right? We just don't know. But it raises something. We are told Joel Cauchi was schizophrenic, offers medication, because sometimes, it can suppress the libido. People are doing really well. They think, I don't need the medication anymore. So often that doesn't turn out to be true. And he also took ice. Now, again, we do not know to what extent some of that was contributing factors here. Maybe he went back on his meds. I don't know. But just speaking in general, do we need some form of obligation for people who are diagnosed schizophrenic to keep taking their meds? I know it's an imposition on the human rights, unless they get medical permission to go off, right? Maybe if they've... Or maybe it's time we stopped this trend to treat drugs like ice as a health issue. No, when you take it, you are taking a drug that could really make you dangerous. You're priming yourself up potentially, not obviously in all circumstances, otherwise it would have tragedies everywhere, but you're priming yourself to be dangerous to others. And I think this should really be treated as a hard-out crime and not a health issue.
I also, at the start, trying to talk about things that, again, you know how this works after being around it as long as you have, which is that there's going to be a race for the hot take, the if only this, if only that, right? And there's going to be some really stupid things that are going to be said in the next couple of days by people who are going to claim that they mean well, but we all know they're trying to sort of bend this arc in a certain direction. But I am going to say what I said at the start, which was that when we had Port Arthur, there was the reaction of trying to make people safer by reducing the number of guns in the country. I know there are some people watching us now that are still frustrated about how that worked, but as a principle, clearly it was one that everyone united around. I think we've got to have a conversation about, and a really serious, deep, boring one, frankly, which is not going to be fun for the internet or the rest of it, about mental health, which is that we moved away from institutionalisation a couple of generations ago. And I keep thinking about the family in Toowoomba. If they knew that their son was in a world of pain or potential, could become violent to somebody else, they should have a power to be able to try to take that person off the streets.
Look, I tend to agree. Again, I'll make the caveat, we simply do not know enough, right? And it's the temptation always, exactly as you just said, to reach for the lesson from this is bang, and then we're going to be safer. And I guess we need that security blanket. But just again, speaking generally, now in this case, we were told, this man was known to police. Generally, if someone who is schizophrenic is known to police, as in police came around a number of times to deal with whatever was happening, maybe like I'm saying that, is it time that we thought what comes first is not just the safety of others, but also their own safety. I mean, This man is now dead, for instance, but also the safety of the family. You say, the family should have the power. Sometimes you're talking about people who love their children dearly and do not want to call the police on them for one reason or another, to keep a bond. But if the police have been there a number of times, what is our proper response there? And again, you're thinking, we're getting so many instances, it seems, I haven't seen the stats, someone will probably correct me, but it seems to me more people troubled by current or past drug use than 50 years ago for sure, and very troubled, right? That, for instance, marijuana, use by the young can actually trigger the kind of psychoses where people do hear voices. And if you've got an underlying condition of, schizophrenia, it can actually make that worse.
Opens the door to a way.
And then if you take meth, exactly. If you take methamphetamines, then you've got you could have a real problem. And I wonder whether we should stop treating this as, the ultimate individual expression, it's just personal choice. And if we find someone that's got, doing some of this, it's a health issue, don't make it a criminal issue. Like I say, we make it a criminal issue if you drive too fast in a car. Because, it might be a safe driver, you might be a Formula One driver and you can handle a car at 140k in a 60 zone. But you're a menace to others, and that's a crime. Maybe we should look a little more severely at that, I don't know.
Thank you for the chat tonight, mate. No doubt you will remonstrate and have plenty more to say tomorrow, 7 o'clock in your normal time slot. But thanks for the chat tonight, mate. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
The great Andrew Bolt. You can see him, of course, 7 o'clock after Peter Credlin tomorrow night, and no doubt Chris Kenny as well. Lots of things to be said, lots of emotion to be processed, and we'll go through all of that journey with you for the rest of the night here on Paul Murray Live. There is a lot of other news around over the weekend. We'll get to that in a few minutes' time. But again, let's keep focusing on what's been happening in and around in the aftermath of what took place in Bondi Junction yesterday. Of course, tomorrow there'll be more commemoration across New South Wales. You'll hear plenty more from people in charge, but also as the days roll on, we learn more about the people who have been taken from us. And we learn from the security company that employed the Pakistani refugee, a man who was in this country because he was being persecuted in his own country. His local Islamic community have come out and spoken warmly of him today. And as Julia told you before, they were part of a vigil in front of the centre tonight. But the company has said, as you can see, it is with immense sadness that I confirm the terrible news that one of our security team members, Faraz Ahmed Tahir, suffered fatal injuries while trying to protect the community during yesterday's tragedy at Westfield Bondi Junction. We are devastated by his passing and recognise that our team member's bravery and a role as a first responder. Our deepest and heartfelt condolences go out to his family and all who are mourning the loss of loved ones. Our thoughts and concern are also with the families and carers of those that are injured in the attack and the community of everyday heroes whose actions prevented further loss of life. Another member of our security team was injured and remains in hospital. This news is deeply felt by our Westfield Bondi team and our security partner GLAD, the entire Sentier Group team as well. We are providing mental health and counselling services for the customers, business partners and people. Our team continues to provide full assistance to the emergency services as they investigate yesterday's tragedy. And again, part of trying to work all of that out is the mindset of the person responsible here. Now, for obvious reasons, that information dies with him, but people have to try to piece together in part what led to all of this. Tim Watson-Munro is a criminal psychologist. You've seen him on the air a little bit in the past couple of days, and I'm pleased to say he joins us now. Tim, there's multiple parts to all of this, but can I just ask before we start to get into anything a little more detail, is there anything that has started to gather as a narrative that you think needs to be corrected? Is there anything that the news media or even we're discussing this evening is sort of going in the wrong direction of trying to understand here?
I don't think so, Paul. I think the media coverage has been comprehensive. I've read a lot of it. I've watched a lot of it. There's been some discussion about whether this person was mad or bad, some discussion that he may have had a schizophrenic illness, which would suggest that he might have been crazy. But I've seen other footage where he went into a restaurant, ordered a meal, came back and ate the meal. It seemed to me that he was pretty well organised. It seems to me that he was able to acquire a knife with a long blade, and he was then able to return to Westfield at Bondi Junction and use that knife to deadly effect. So I think the coverage, as far as I'm aware, has been very comprehensive, fair and reasonable.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to get a protection note. I just wanted to double check because I know that somebody in your expertise, I mean, again, there's all these people talking and opining on television. I wanted to double check that somebody who knew what they were talking about was in the same place, and I'm glad to hear it. Now, Tim, again, you've looked at about 30,000 cases in your career, which has gone all the way from jails to where we are tonight.
Yes.
Could you tell us about some of the processes that will be taken upon to try to work out everything they possibly can about this bloke?
Certainly, as best I know, they would look at his social history. They would look at his forensic history, as he have one. I understand from the police that he was known to the police, but he's never been charged with anything. If he was schizophrenic, there may well be a medical history. I've read that his family have sent their condolences to the community and the families of the deceased. They may cooperate with this process. And I guess you would look at social media footprints as well. People who may have known him in Sydney. What was he doing in the last days or hours of his life? I gather he was living rough, for example. He had a small storage shed and so on. So I think it's a sort of holistic approach, Paul, where they gather as much information as they can. They cobble it together and then they try and get a better clinical picture of this individual. I think the important thing too is to look at what may have triggered this. I read that he had put out feelers for company. He wanted to go stargazing. He wanted someone to surf with. He may have well been very isolated and lonely in Sydney, but something has triggered him yesterday to carry out this wanton act of murder of 6 innocent people.
Now, the broader discussion, again, I'm trying to sort of caution the world against what it will do naturally, which is to try to have a competition of hot takes about what can and can't happen and should and shouldn't happen. We've obviously made, my belief is that we made a very significant change decades ago about institutionalisation for largely positive reasons, but a lot of things have happened since, and I think we have to have an honest conversation about how a mental health system works. But obviously this person in particular, as you say, he's sleeping rough, he's living in his car. It's not like the interaction is there through a job or something like that. So, but there's another thing which is around, which is that the amount of significant mental illness that is being diagnosed in the community seems to have rapidly increased. And I know that in and of itself, we're going to have an hour-long discussion about. But what is your suggestion to those that have the responsibility to try to prevent things like this from happening again, about the types of areas we need to be looking into to plug holes that may well have built through the best of intentions?
It's a very good question with respect, and I think we need to be putting much greater resources into mental health. It was a commendable step to get people out of institutions, but I think what regrettably is happening is that a large number of those people, for various reasons, are falling through the cracks. We have a housing crisis in Australia that we've never seen before. It's hard enough for employed people to secure accommodation. The most vulnerable in the community, the mentally ill in the community, if they're not cared for in a hospital or an institution, may be sleeping rough, may not be coping, may not be accessing the type of treatment they require, and may not be accessing or being compliant with the medication they need. And I can tell you anecdotally, I mean, my practice is really one of assessing people ahead of court appearances. I don't do treatment per se, but trying to get someone in to see a psychologist or a psychiatrist these days for treatment, good luck with that. It can take 3 to 6 months, people are on waiting lists and so on. So I think we need to recognise there is a mental health crisis because of a lack of resources. And the other relevant issue is that of substance use. I don't know if it's correct with this person. I read he may have been using crystal methamphetamines, ice. He may have been using other mind-altering drugs. If he had a mental illness to start with, clearly those sorts of drugs would have exacerbated those problems. So the two things go hand in glove in many ways, that substance use in the community can often exacerbate people with mental health issues, and then we don't have the resources to deal with them.
Yeah, Tim, fascinating to discuss things, to take the time, have the adult conversation. Thank you for your expertise. Do appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you. What a lovely man. Tim Watson-Munro is his name, criminal psychologist. So again, back to James and to Christy. James, about the access to mental health support services. I mean, again, it doesn't matter if we're talking about child psychologists like our mate Claire Rowe, who's constantly on air, talking about the great waiting lists that are for people. You just heard what Tim's had to say. Excellent point you made before about considering his access or obvious lack of being a homeless person. I assume there are systems where homeless people can go to a place to get their relevant medication, but I don't know if that's what actually happens. We would like to hope that it is, and if it doesn't happen, that's what needs to be put in place. Again, I'm not going to play my usual sort of team red, team blue role, but I think, you know, decisions made, and again, it's not in relation to this situation, but, you know, telehealth is something a lot of people have really latched onto as a way of reaching out. Again, none of this stuff's sexy, none of this stuff gets votes, none of this stuff's going to be on the front page of the paper, none of this stuff's going to get clicks going, but this is the basic, boring stuff that we've got to build a bridge to, don't we?
Well, all you have to do, Paul, is go and sit in the back of a courtroom any given day and watch defence lawyers tell the judge that their client has bashed their partner or bashed someone within the community within an inch of their life because they were on either no medication or the wrong medication, or they're self-medicating with other illicit substances. And these cases could be happening on a daily basis if we don't get mental health right. So that's certainly one facet to the argument. The other thing too is, and I think this really drives a message to those shopping centres out there who are quibbling over a few bucks from the Queensland police force over rent within the shopping centres, police beats should be mandatory, just like disabled toilets and mothers' rooms. 100%. They serve a purpose for shopping centres. And I think some of these bigger organisations need to rethink their rates in which they charge the police force, because in this instance here, police had to come to that shopping centre, and if it wasn't for the common sense, bravery and the training that New South Wales police officer that she had, look, they are trained to go in and deal with these circumstances. As ugly as they are trained. So she also was carrying a weapon to defend herself and defend those around her. So well done to New South Wales Police. The training pays off as it's evident. And I think, a lot needs to be unpacked after this weekend. It won't surprise me if the Prime Minister calls for a Royal Commission over the next couple of weeks into mental health.
And certainly it would be something that you would imagine the extreme number of people are going to automatically support that. Again, we sit here and we will, the hardest markers possible, but I think the statements of the Prime Minister, the Premier, all the public officials have been absolutely appropriate in the way they've been dealing with things. I certainly hope that, again, as the time rolls on, and it is going to be an impatient process, but they commit to these serious, complicated questions, which are going to have a lot of different opinions and a lot of different interest groups involved, but still have the courage to take it on. In the same way, as I say, one of the defining things about John Howard's Prime Ministership was the response to Port Arthur, the execution of it. Again, some people will have its issues, but the purpose of it and the need for it was pretty clear, and I think that's the same here. Now, again, Christy, with these big questions around mental health, with these big questions around resourcing, but also these things of how public spaces need to keep themselves safe, are you happy with the way that these big organisations do keep us safe, or do you think that more could be done? I mean, obviously, literally in terms of the line of shopping centre issues in Sydney, it's 1991, then it's 2024, right? So there's a very long period of time in between them, and in the same way that general sort of security work it sometimes feels not quite pointless, but security theatre because nothing happens. Perhaps the theatre is the reason why nothing happens, and that in and of itself might be a little specious, but still. What's your thoughts on that?
Look, we're certainly very grateful for the attention that a lot of our major sporting organisations and stadiums around Australia pay to security and to police presence and working and collaborating with their state police forces. I think we're really well served as a country in that respect around big events and big gatherings. We're probably not as well served in major retail strips, and I include high streets and open-air malls as well as shopping centres. And I think the community would probably expect that they can have access to law enforcement in major public areas like shopping centres. I don't think many people would know that there's a chargeback between state police forces and shopping centre owners. We see police in shopping centres, but I think they're just there as members of the community, not doing mandatory patrols. As for mental health, I think that there are advocates in our community who have been for decades since we had a reform of the mental health institutionalisation in this country, as you said, 20, 30 years ago, who are crying to state governments and federal governments, to anybody, saying, my son, my daughter has severe mental health issues, needs a bed in a mental health institution, otherwise they're a danger to the community, to themselves, to the family. We don't know what will happen, and they are routinely told, these parents in desperation, that there is nowhere for your child, whether they're a teenager or an adult, to go. You have to look after them at home. And maybe now some of that evidence, we can start having a conversation around that in Australia.
Yeah, and it is horrible that it's often the worst possible moment where we start to turn our attention to things we should have listened to for a long time. Stick with us, guys. We'll get on to some general news in a moment or two's time because there are other things that are around. But I wanted to focus in on, obviously, the actions of this incredible police inspector. There were all of these people running around with tactical gear and machine guns and all the sort of riot squad stuff. But the actual person who brought this to the end, of course, was just a lone officer of incredible experience, confronted him, told him to drop the weapon, didn't, and then, of course, put the shots into his body that ended his life and, more importantly, ended the threat. This is what the police commissioner had to say, and then in a second I want to show you something pretty extraordinary that happened here on the air at Sky News just a couple of hours ago.
She's doing well under the circumstances. As I said, she showed enormous courage and bravery, and she will process, obviously, that. She would need to be interviewed formally, and so we just talked about that she's okay, her family's okay, she's got everything she needs for the time being, and she will be formally interviewed tomorrow, no doubt. She must have been close by and was just the first officer on the scene.
Evelyn Ray is part of the Sky News family, and in the life before that, of course, she was a police officer in New South Wales. We had a conversation with her and everyone else who was part of the Sunday Showdown just a couple of hours ago here at Sky News, and we got into the details of the training and about what goes through your mind, what happens at that moment when you confront someone like this. It was an extraordinary insight I hadn't seen anywhere else.
As a former police officer, you've been trained in the same way that Amy Scott was trained. Ultimately, what she did might not be nice to a lot of people, but it was the only answer at that point in time. Her training kicked in exactly as it should have.
Oh, absolutely. Like, without a doubt, she performed remarkably. She did an incredible job.
The fatal shot itself,
yeah,
right, that is actually the training of the police officers coming to the fore, isn't it? So in other words, anybody who thinks, why couldn't you have shot in the leg on her arm or something like that, the training says something different, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You only draw your firearm, and you're only legally allowed to draw your firearm if there's an imminent threat to your life or the life of somebody else.
She also explained that part of the training is that as soon as you fired the gun, then you have to go to the person that you have fired upon, so literally trying to stop them, but then also move into an immediate phase of trying to save their life, something that obviously didn't happen in this case. But extraordinary training, and just to those people who all day, every day, walk towards what everyone else will run away from, whose entire day, every day, is about going to the thing that is the worst moment of somebody's life. We thank you every single time, to Evelyn and everyone who serves in the force in New South Wales and right around the country. Again, what you do is extraordinary, and you are the heroes amongst us. Quick break, back with more. We'll move on to some of the rest of the day's stuff worth talking about. Special 90-minute edition of the program tonight. We will continue our chat with Christy and James in a moment. Well, as we focus on what's been happening here over the weekend, lots of other things have happened around the world. Next week is going to be a particularly big news week as well. Monday, American time, is when Donald Trump is going to actually have his first criminal case begin. That won't be live TV streamed, but it'll be treated like that with plenty of information. We'll have everyone from Nigel Farage to Megyn Kelly and a whole lot more across all of that. Of course, also in the past 24 hours, we saw Iran responding to Israel. Now, Israel, of course, had a situation where they had destroyed an embassy which was in Syria, in Damascus, and that was the moment that Iran said needed to be paid for. Now, Iran had claimed that everything they'd done in the past 24 hours, that's it, it's over, which is hundreds of drones and missiles, which of course have been sent towards Israel. Amazingly, Israel was able to destroy virtually all of them. Just one person was apparently a casualty. The US President, Joe Biden, has, of course, told Iran not to go any further.
What is your message to Iran in this moment?
Don't.
Are American personnel and assets at risk, Mr. President?
Now, that was when it was a threat. Now it's a reality. Christy McSweeney and James Ashby here on the rest of the day's news. Christy, now, the great fear, of course, was that while Iran has been backing Hamas, while Iran has been sort of playing games for a long period of time in the region, they weren't actually the ones pulling a trigger. Well, they did so, but Israel had the technology to stop it. Now, Iran came out and said today, that's it. Now, either they made a calculated decision that they assumed none of these things would land, or they were surprised that Israel was able to knock many of the drones out of the sky. And the drones, when you throw a whole bunch of drones at the Iron Dome, it's a very different proposition than just a missile or a rocket. Do you think that that's it, one and done here?
Look, I'm not a Middle East expert, Paul, but what is clear is that there has been an escalation and both the United States government, and of course that leads to the position, the precarious position that our government here in Australia seems to be taking, which is not a position at all, really, or struggling to find a position. But if it does escalate further and Iran does continue activity, or Israel continues activity against Iran, we're going to have to make some decisions politically here in Australia and follow through with the United States.
I mean, James, we have this scenario where, again, I mean, there is no Goldilocks position here. It's all going to cause trouble in every single direction here. It just was quite interesting to see Iran saying that, all right, we've sent it and that's it. Now, again, I don't trust Iran. I don't believe Iran. But obviously Iran, to this point, has not fired anything. Do you believe them that that's it?
No. And look, the only benefit that Israel has is the fact that they've got superior technology, warfare technology there, where that Arrow aerial system managed to defend the country quite well. I recognise that a couple got through, but for the most part, it was defended very well. I'd hate to have the American forces, let's face it, it's not Joe Biden that goes in and saves the day, it's the American forces that will. But Albo's got a few spinning plates to keep in the air this week, and he's got to pick a side. Who's he going to back? Is it going to be Israel? I hope so, because we need to be on the same side as the Yanks and Israelis, that's for sure.
All right. Now, also in all of this again, and I mentioned this in the Sunday Showdown, right? And again, these conversations, they become so complicated so quickly, and there's people ready to pounce, but I'll do my best. If you're a person who believes in a two-state solution, then at some point in time that means a recognition of Palestine, right? Penny Wong has, of course, started to move towards that position. It's certainly the one that the left would like to happen. However, for obvious reasons, the Palestine that would become a country at the moment would end up with Hamas as its government, right? But it is a very odd amount of timing here, and we know, Christy, what's going on here, which is that for obvious reasons, much of the world has quite a reaction to Israel's reaction to October the 7th, right? Not going to pretend that that's not the case. But it was to me a little confusing that at a time when things are still literally, there is a hot war going on, that was the time to start to change where Australia stood about the recognition of Palestine.
Well, it's certainly politically calculated. Someone of the Foreign Minister's wide experience and competence knows exactly what she's saying in broadcasting such thoughts and such a position. Of course, she's signalling to the internal Labor audience and external Labor audience, which includes seats in Western Sydney that have between 27 and 35% Muslim population, who the majority of them are in support of Palestine's situation. That is scaring MPs out in Western Sydney, not necessarily that they would lose to the coalition, but that it would see a group of pro-Palestinian local independent identities split the ALP's vote in those communities, reduce the margin and perhaps put Labor on an equal footing with the Greens against independent identities across Western Sydney and, of course, here in Melbourne as well. So it's not about global democracy. It's not about Australia's position as supporting a democratic nation in the Middle East like Israel. It's domestic.
Well, as is the situation with Biden, right? Okay, he says what he says today about Iran, but then let's be honest,
exactly.
His own presidential hopes, well, they may well end up evaporating because of his willingness to stand by what Israel's been doing in response to what Hamas did. Of course, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live.